And now, Harry, um, it's your turn again. And I apologize. I did not plan a lengthy introduction of Harry because I felt like he's so well known to most people here. Um, but he is one of our computer gurus as well as our sound manager and does many, many good things for our congregation as well as serving on the board and taking his turn preaching and worship leading and music. Harry.
I have memories of my first talk here, and I went over by a little bit, 30, 40 minutes over, and was rebuked, and I had no idea. So since then, I've been better. Not great, but better. So I'm setting 2 timers, and hopefully I will pay attention to them. I bumped into this book in the library. It was on the free books place where you walk in and they just hand out books. And I just picked it up and took it home. It's called Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Language by Robin Dunbar, published in 1996. I was fascinated, and so that's what my talk is really based on, is that book. Robin Dunbar is a British anthropologist and evolutionary psychologist and a specialist in primate behavior. He is currently head of the Social and Evolutionary Neuroscience Research Group in the Department of Experimental Psychology at the University of Oxford. He is best known for formulating Dunbar's number. You can Google that one, Dunbar, D-U-N-B-A-R, a measurement of the cognitive limit to the number of individuals with whom any one person can maintain stable relationships. Dunbar's number is 150. That's the mean amount that most people can sustain intimate relationships with. And 150 comes up in this talk. So, I'm going to discuss the origin of human language as, according to Robin Dunbar's theory. It was not terribly well received by his peers and was attacked for numerous reasons. And you will have a lot of questions, probably. And I can't answer all of them, but he tries to. So, I'm going to present the idea that human language evolved because it allowed human groups, prior to civilization, to be stable with around 150 members, far more than any other similar group of primates. Civilization began around 10,000 years ago. This evolution occurred before that. Most of this discussion relates to the group of species called primates. These include humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, monkeys, and many related species. The term group size refers to the size of a community in which all members live together, know all other members, and have an appropriate range of close bonds with many other members. Terms like tribe and extended family group may help you understand the kind of group referred to here. Having a large group size gives an evolutionary advantage over similar primates with smaller group size. Evolution favored those changes that favored larger group size. This theory is based on the idea that larger group size required a lot more social interaction and awareness than smaller ones. This also explains the fact that humans have the most powerful brains of any species. The large amount of computing power in each human brain is needed to permit the socialization needed for larger group size. Early primates evolved to permit larger groups by using grooming as a very key part of bonding between individuals. Primates groom each other sometimes for hours. Grooming defined how close one animal was to another. Primates evolved toward increasing awareness of who their friends were and how close they were. Dealing with increasing amount of information about relationships, mostly related to grooming, required more brain power. Primates remember who their recent grooming partners were and use this to decide who to trust, who to count on for help. Grooming one-on-one has limits, and some primate species evolved to where their group size was close to that limit, around 50. Humans were able to pass that limit by replacing grooming with talking. By using language to do what grooming had been doing, humans were able to have larger group sizes. Stated bluntly, language evolved to allow for increased gossip. Gossip contains the complex exchange of information needed to allow human group size to grow to around 150, while primate species still using grooming could not have sustainable groups greater than around 50. This perspective can raise a lot of questions, concerns, and objections in the minds of those who hear it. In his book, Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Language, Robin Dunbar tries to consider and deal with all of the problems critics have with this theory. There's no way I can do that today. However, I can try to convey what I thought were the most important aspects of his perspective. Let me start with evolution. Darwin did not introduce the concept of evolution. The concept was already well known and accepted when Darwin came along. What Darwin did was to explain why and how it happened. He introduced the idea of natural selection. Let's take a quick look at that. Assume there are brown beetles and green beetles. Assume that the birds prefer green beetles. They tend to eat more of the green beetles than the brown beetles. Over time, the brown beetles begin to become more dominant, and eventually, if this continues, green beetles become extinct. That's natural selection. When a mutation occurs or a change, it has a cost. For example, one of the things that animals have to deal with is predators. The bigger you are, the less likely you are to have predators after you. However, if you're bigger, you need more food. If you need more food, you have to cover more areas, more range, more got to find it. So it's a cost. It's a trade-off. And evolution is constantly striking a balance between the cost of an advantageous feature and what it adds, the benefit it gives. So another interesting one is tree animals versus land animals. There's an advantage to going into trees. You can escape the predators on the land. However, there's a disadvantage. You can't be too big because the branches break. You can't go up too high and the predators can get to you. So you have to do a trade-off. And the same thing with the terrestrial ones. Another interesting one is color vision. Color vision is advantageous for those animals that have it. They can identify different fruits better. They can see predators better. They can distinguish more in their world. But it costs a fair amount of brain power. You need a bigger brain to handle color vision. And brains are expensive things for humans. They take a lot of energy. Some key questions here are, what in natural selection gave greater benefit than cost to larger group size? Why does a larger group size require dealing with more complex relationships? What evidence is there that dealing with more complex relationships required larger brain size? What evidence is there that grooming activity is related to dealing with complex relationships? What evidence is there that humans replaced grooming with language while other primates did not? I'll start with brain size. The term intelligence is often used for the brain power of an individual or a species. In this age, we could think of intelligence as the amount of computing power in a brain. Scientists have no reliable way of measuring the intelligence of any individual, nor do they have any way to measure the average intelligence of a species of animal. Many scientists note a strong correlation between the apparent average intelligence of an individual and the size of the brain. Among primates, there is a close correlation between the apparent intelligence of a species and the size of the brain of the species, the mean size of the brain. Later in this talk, I will discuss some of the ways that relative intelligence of different species was estimated. That intentionalization was a bit of that. That's one of the things they tested extensively with chimpanzees, and they find that humans, the chimpanzees rarely get beyond the level of 2, and a 2-year-old is starting to approach the level of 2. He can say, I believe my mother doesn't like me, or I believe my mother hid the chocolate. That's a 2 level of that. Well, chimpanzees approach that, nothing else does. So there's one of the areas where we differentiate the intelligence, or what we call that. However, some large animals, like elephants and whales, have bigger brains than humans. This seems to be because the bigger brain is needed to deal with larger body of muscles and nerves. To adjust for this, scientists began to look at the relative size of brain, that is, the ratio between the average brain weight and the average body weight of a species. Relative brain size was found to be a better measure of the apparent computing power of each species. Dunbar then states, page 61 to 62, the mammalian brain seems to consist of three main sections. The primitive brain we have inherited more or less intact from our distant reptile-like ancestors. The midbrain and other subcortical areas that are mainly concerned with sensory integration and the machinery of living. And finally, the cortex, the outer layer that is pretty much unique to the mammals. Within this broad arrangement, however, primate brains strike us as unusual. One particular part, the neocortex, has changed out of all proportion to what it looks like in other mammals. The neocortex is what you might call the thinking part of the brain, the place where conscious thought takes place. It is a rather thin layer, being a mere 5 or 6 nerve cells, about 3 millimeters deep. This thin slab of neural tissue is wrapped around the inner mammalian brain and receives and sends neurons to many parts of the brain. In most mammals, the neocortex accounts for 30 to 40% of total brain volume. But in primates, it varies from a low of 50% in some primitians to 80% of the total brain volume in human. It seems to me we really should be looking at the neocortex.
Okay.
When we looked at primates, it turned out there was no correlation between the size of the neocortices of species and any of the obvious ecological criteria, things like percentage of fruit in the diet, size of territory, distance traveled each day, or the complexity of the diet measured. In other words, they found that there didn't seem to be a correlation between the neocortex size and the problems that the species had to deal with in getting food and covering territory. It did correlate, however, to group size. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
Dunbar's view is that the larger neocortex of primates and implied greater computer power was related to their particularly complex social behavior. Other views suggested the brains were needed to solve problems of life and survival. Dunbar convinced me that the social behavior view was more likely. This is obviously a matter of opinion and debate, and researchers will be working on it probably forever. Using group size as a measure of social complexity, the data showed a high correlation between the size of the neocortex of primates and the group size. Interestingly, a similar correlation was found in non-primates. For example, vampire bats are the most social of the bat species, more than other bat species. They found that the vampire bats had significantly larger neocortexes than their less social cousins. So it not only applies to primates, but it's really noticeable in primates. I also want to mention here that larger brains have significant costs on the evolutionary scale. They use a lot of energy, and this means the animal has to get more food than a similar-sized animal with a smaller brain. Embryos, infants, and children also require a lot of extra energy to support brain growth. Now let's look at group size and social complexity. Why use group size as a measure of social complexity? For one thing, it's one of the few variables that can be easily measured, and data is available for many primate species that have been studied. Dunbar states, read pages 63 to 64.
That's it.
The other reason why group size is a good measure, the other reason was that in one very important respect, social complexity does increase with the group size. Given that primate social life is characterized by the ability of animals to recognize relationships between third party, Jim's relationship with John, as well as John's relationship with me, there is a real sense, that's that third level of intentionality, by the way, there is a real sense in which the social complexity of group rises exponentially as its physical size increases. In a group of 5 individuals, I have to keep track of a set of 4 relationships between myself and the other group members. but I have to monitor 6 additional relationships involving the other 4 individuals. In a group of 20, I have to keep track of 19 relationships between myself and fellow group members and 171 third-party relationships involving the other 19 members of the group. While my relationship with everyone else has increased roughly fivefold with the fivefold increase in group size, the number of third-party relationships I have to keep track of has increased almost 30-fold. Crude though it may be, group size does provide one index of the amount of information process a social animal has to engage in. So, group size seems to be associated with social complexity, and brains seem to need to be bigger to handle social complexity. The idea here is that larger group size is based on the amount of bonding between individuals. The amount of computing power needed to deal with more pairings and more sensitive pairings, how strong is the bond, is greater than when the group is smaller and requires less. Consider this quote from the book. There were a lot of anecdotes about chimpanzees and other creatures interacting, which I won't be able to read you, but some of them were fascinating. This one gets into it a little bit. Great. It turns out there's a hierarchy. At the top is humans. We're really a chimpanzee. We're really a third kind of chimpanzee. Chimpanzees and humans are near the top. Next down is the gorillas and the apes, the orangutans, and then you go down to lower monkeys. And the neocortex grows greatly with those 3. We'll get to that. And their ability, their intentionality, all this thing, all of it's hierarchical. So, monkeys and apes, for example, were able to work out the implication that Jim's relationship with John might have for the relationship between John and themselves. In other words, if they get along well with Jim, and Jim gets along well with John, they figure they might get along well with John. So monkeys and apes can figure this out. Recognizing that Jim was John's friend, they would know it wasn't worth asking Jim. They would know it wasn't worth asking Jim to help them against John. So it's complex, who you can trust, who you can ask to help you, who are your allies. Other animals, by contrast, would only understand the relationship they have with Jim and John, not Jim and John, their relationship. That would be that second level. And might make the mistake of seeking Jim's being against John. So they saw this again and again in primates, this kind of behavior that implied something was going on socially. They did not see it in lesser animals, ones with less neocortex. How about the evolutionary advantage of group size? One argument here is that larger groups allow for greater protection from predators. There are more eyes to keep watch for predators coming within attack distance. If a predator gets within attack distance, bad things happen. You ever see a lion in a video walking through a bunch of gazelles, and they don't seem to mind, they're just standing around. As long as he's outside their attack distance, they don't care. Once he steps in, they're gone, and they're safe. So, more eyes. Also, there are more members to come to the aid of anyone under attack. I like this. The parallel is a thug might attack one grandmother, but would be hesitant to attack a group of 20 grandmothers. So the apes, it turns out, do come and help each other. And in fact, they've filmed incidents of gorillas chasing leopards up a tree. So that's another advantage of group size. The book also mentions that a larger group creates greater confusion for an attacking predator. During the time the attacker is confused by many animals running in many directions, many can escape. So that's the whole group size. That's one of the assumptions he asks us to make, that group size has an evolutionary advantage. Of course, it has a cost, too. Grooming. I wish I had time to read you some of the most interesting discussions of the role of grooming in different primate groups. Dunbar tells us, here in some imperfectly understood way, lies the key to the process that give primate societies their cohesion and sense of belonging. Grooming. Here in some imperfectly understood way lies the key to the process that gives primate societies their cohesion and sense of belonging. They use grooming as a measure of making friends, knowing who their friends are. They groom each other. Males do it too, not just females. the whole the book states. Let's see how we're doing on time. Popping along. That can't be right. It says I have 20 seconds. The other one says I have 5 minutes. I like the other one. Okay. The book states that among the higher primates there is a strong relationship between the amount of time a species spends in grooming and the mean size of bonded groups in that species. The primate species of monkeys, gorillas, and apes and chimpanzees spend 10 to 20% of their time grooming. This is a high-cost trait. Time spent grooming is not available for other important survival activities such as gathering food, detecting and warning predators, and raising offspring. I want to remind you that using these relationships between the percent of time grooming and mean group size, we would project, based on the human brain size and the group size, the 150, we would need to spend about 10 hours a day grooming in order to have a mean group size of 115. In other words, if human used grooming the same way the chimpanzees did, in order to have a group size, which is Dunbar's number, of 150, we'd have to be grooming 10 hours a day. We can't afford to do that. Language replacing grooming. This is probably the hardest pill to swallow in this theory. Some of the arguments are, humans maintain closely bonded groups too large to be supported by grooming. Their required level of social complexity would require humans to spend 10 hours a day grooming. Language and talking allow individuals to groom more than one person at a time. I'm grooming a very large group right now. Language allows individuals to give and get information, sometimes lots of information, about relationships between the speaker, others present, and others who are not present. Using language, individuals can give and get information about relationships between people who are not present. Who can you trust? Who should you avoid or fear? Without language, this information can only be learned by direct observation. So the primates can only learn the third-party stuff by seeing it. They can't tell each other, whereas humans with language can. Language took over what grooming was doing. This book also contains a number of interesting observations about the primary use of language among humans today. It points out a large portion of all conversations relate more to gossip-type information than other things. Who is doing what with whom? What status is rising or falling? What celebrity or well-known person is in trouble? And so forth. Note that most books in a town bookstore are fiction, especially romance and mystery. Even a significant portion of nonfiction are biographies, more gossip. Television, movies, magazines, and many newspapers and other mass media devote far more space to gossip-related topics than news about politics, business, or science. Animal intelligence. I was hoping to have time to tell you about this. The book discusses a number of well-documented attempts to teach language to chimpanzees, who are the most intelligent of the primates, next to humans. In no case did the subject seem to get much beyond the language skills of a 2-year-old. They pretty much stopped there. The Coco had 1,000 words, but they were pretty much the level of 2-year-old. 2-year-olds have around 1,000 words. When they get to 6 or 7, they've got close to 60,000 words. So something's going on there. Then I've already covered intentionality with Fred, Maxine, and Oliver, so I don't have to get into that. That bell's about to go off to say my time is up, and I actually have in here a whole another 20 minutes on virtual reality, which you're lucky you're not going to get today. I'll just add, the book I read on virtual reality implied that it may allow for development of a whole new human language, unlike anything we have now, where you can create visual three-dimensional communications on the fly like we do at talking. So that is my presentation. Hey.